We have another terrific show and an amazing guest for you today. Support and investment in the U.S. commercial space industry is really central to maintaining America's leadership position in space. And our speaker today has really dedicated her career to that very thing. Welcome to the Tech and Space Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Kelli Kedis Ogborn. She is a strategic advisor to the Commercial Space Federation. Welcome to the show, Kelli.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Sure thing. Thanks so much for making time to be here. Maybe we can start by having you give just a little bit of background on yourself and the Commercial Space Federation.
Sure. Well, thank you, and it's nice to be with everyone live. So as mentioned, I'm Kelli Kedis Ogborn. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office, and I'm recently with the Commercial Space Federation. As mentioned, I'm a strategic advisor. I am specifically looking at global markets and industry engagement. By way of background and sort of what I do is I am a space economy strategist is probably the easiest way to say it. I come from a background of government R&D and innovation. I've been in that world for about 18 years, and then specifically in the space world for about 6. And so specifically what I look at is how the space economy and commercial space is going to evolve and all of the different various data points that mix into that. So whether it's geopolitics, policy, regulatory framework, investment, tech development, ecosystems. Because as we know, technology development is not one size fits all, and particularly in the space world. And so with the CSF in particular, what they do is they are one of the leading associations representing the commercial space sector, as you mentioned, in the United States. And what they focus on is they bring companies across the space ecosystem, everything from, launch and satellite operators to data to infrastructure to downstream applications. And so they really look at the value chain and the supply chain and how they can advance policies that enable sustainable industry growth. What I'm going to be looking at is a lot more of that international engagement and connective tissue. As we all know, space is global now. There's no way to avoid that. And a lot of our commercial capabilities, transatlantic and elsewhere, are really critical to advancing what we want within commercial space and the space economy. And so I'm going to be not only advancing that connective thread within CSF members, but also getting us engaged in different ecosystem conversations.
Wow, amazing, amazing. So what a fantastic background. And having worked sort of at that intersection of government R&D and commercialization in the space industry, what do you see as some of the most common misconceptions that I guess traditional tech leaders have about entering the space industry?
Yeah. So I would say at a top level, what I find really interesting about the space world is that space is known well, but not well known, right? So when people think about space, whoever it is, they automatically have an idea of what space means for them. A lot of people, it's astronauts and rockets. Other folks, it may be the very particular vertical that they work within. But how it all plays together and some of the intricacies and nuance are often not known. I think when it comes to space in particular, about a misconception, a lot of times other founders from tech verticals will think that space behaves like those and the markets that they know, and it certainly doesn't. Particularly in the modern space industry where commercialization of space is more prominent and more sought out, they just assume that it behaves like another product market, when in reality, it's an ecosystem that is deeply tied to national priorities and geopolitical frameworks and, integrated infrastructure build out and the necessity for long-term demand creation, not just iteration, which is very different. And so in space, a lot of times it's not just like, can you build it, but more it's questions around who is obligated to buy it, who will buy it, under what policy and framework will it be regulated, and what's its capacity for scale, which is just a very different calculus for engaging a market. And so traditional tech leaders, depending on the vertical they're in, are used to things like speed and iteration and, relatively low barriers to entry. but the space world operates under a different set of constraints. We have regulatory complexity, we have long capital cycles, mission assurance, and then I think more prominently, just uncertain demand signals. Within our ecosystem now, we are really trying to accelerate our commercialization flywheel to move past government as an anchor to being one of many customers to open up a true space economy. And I think once we do that, our market may have more tractability to others and kind of more predictability, but we're very unique and very nuanced.
Yeah, what do you think are some of the biggest, I guess, gating factors to having that happen? Because I think there is a lot of discussion about how government funding and space agency funding is still so central and important to supporting the commercialization of
Yeah.
space. And so it's kind of like, what are those gating factors that are sort of, if we remove them, it could really get this rolling from a commercial perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's important to understand why we're even in this moment now, right? So the our systems of operating are still very much created and were created for 1960s ways of engaging space. And it's really no fault to the industry because that's how our ecosystem evolved, right? It evolved from the Apollo era, and then capabilities and technologies progressed. We are in a really unique place now, though, where that tech development and opportunity is really meeting the moment, but the frameworks have not necessarily caught up. And it's primarily because commercial space as we know it now. So commercial space has existed since the 90s with telecom, right? And a lot of these other backbone utilities. But modern commercial space, when people are talking about lunar infrastructure and, in-space mining and some of these other aspects, the idea of that didn't really come into the collective mind until 2020. And it was particularly because that was the first year that SpaceX flew a crewed human mission into space. And so access and utility and opportunity really expanded beyond people just thinking that space was just for governments. And so that's only 6 years ago, right? I mean, really, if you think about it. Um, and we haven't then had the capital matchup. The technology finally got to a point of maturity. So we are just now at a place where we need to close business cases because our capabilities are now flying at what feels like an operational cadence. But the regulatory framework and the way that we bring in investment and how everything coordinates still needs to catch up. So it's an interesting problem because it's not a capability problem. It's the other stuff. And oftentimes commercialization is all the other stuff as opposed to if you have this exquisite solution that can come onto the market.
Yeah, absolutely. You spent time as a congressional liaison for DARPA.
Mhm.
What did that experience teach you, I guess, about bringing technologies, these really cutting edge technologies to market?
Yeah, no, it's a great follow-up question because I think the biggest piece that I learned there is that breakthrough technology is really only the starting point, and alone it is never enough. And so even in that world, what mattered more was alignment to a clear customer use case and sustained funding. And so you really have to, in the beginning, take something that seems improbable but is technically possible, but make it legible to non-technical people, to people like appropriators and operators, and eventually customers. And so, in a way, timing and narrative matter just as much as the technology do. And the ones that succeed are the ones that can position themselves to a higher calling, things like national security, economic competitiveness, or operational advantage. I think the biggest takeaway, is that high risk technology, it doesn't necessarily move markets because it's impressive. It moves markets because it becomes necessary. And this is certainly true for space because we have seen a lot of founders and a lot of technology come to fruition based on like enthusiasm and hype. And while that is important that a founder should have, they should have, a belief in what it is they're building. That alone is not enough to make a good business and a good product and actually move it into a market where it's meant to be used and for growth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess extending upon that, with your focus on global markets for CSF, What are you seeing kind of as the definition of a space company? How is that evolving as we go into 2026 and beyond?
Yeah, well, I think what's really exciting is that, as I mentioned before, this moment in space is different because we are now at a place where our capabilities have matched up with the opportunity. And we've always been saying that the future of space is for all and that it's going to require every background, skill set, and interest. And I think now is the time to put that in motion because we finally have the capacity to do so. And so when it comes to a space company, I think what's interesting is that a space company today may never touch orbit. So it may be just part of the supply chain that enables in-space capabilities, or it may be a company that leverages the capabilities that orbit provides. And so the shift is really in space being seen just as a sector in and of itself to being more known as embedded infrastructure. And I think that's an important distinction because it now opens the aperture for new capabilities, but also new utility of space as its embedded role in other industries are becoming more understood, like finance, agriculture, defense, infrastructure, logistics, et cetera. And so we have always needed this proof point to show other folks that there is a place for them in space. And I think that now, with all of the capabilities being more broadcast and people paying more attention, and also there's just more of the value chain to engage with, we're going to start to see a lot of these other space adjacent industries and capabilities realize that there is a pathway to scale and to ROI for them within the industry and start to join us.
Yeah, it also just seems like with the whole Artemis mission launching recently, there's just this whole, general
Yes.
excitement across, not just people in the space industry, but kind of everyone everywhere.
Yeah, I am just extremely thrilled that space is now back in the common collective way we think about it. I mean, the fact that, we have not been back to the moon in 50 plus years, and for some generations, they remember when it happened. For others, we grew up knowing it happened, and then younger generations, some of them didn't believe that it happened.
Yeah.
And so it's really important. And I what I love about this mission is that it's once again to go back and have a human presence, but because of what it represents for then having a sustained presence and using it for research and manufacturing and sustained infrastructure is really then going to enable and be this backbone for all this commercial activity that we're talking about, as well as what we're going to find from an exploratory stance.
Right, right. So there's so much talk, ongoing talk about the $1 trillion
Yeah.
space economy. What, I guess, specific tangible infrastructure gaps do you think, entrepreneurs that are in the space industry really need to be focusing on right now to just open up that gate?
Yeah. So what I love about the 1 trillion marker is that it's important because it opens people's eyes. They start to pay attention, but I don't think it's helpful unless you actually talk about the specifics. So I appreciate, speaking about the specific gaps because really to unlock that opportunity, we need to build the backbone. And right now, innovation is really outpacing the capital and the coordination to scale that critical infrastructure. So what's interesting is that the bottleneck isn't ideas, it's throughput. So going back to what we were talking about before with a lot of times it's not the science, it's the other stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So when it comes to the infrastructure pieces, there are a few specific gaps that I can call out, and they're all really connected to accelerate this demand and technical capacity from the ground up. So just looking at the ground segment capacity in general, it's the processing infrastructure and data downlink. So being able to qualify and quantify, what it is we have in space and actually support that ground to space infrastructure is really critical. The next layer is space traffic coordination and space situational awareness. I think that most people know that there are lots of constellation satellites being put into orbit. An interesting data point is that up until 2020, there were about 2,500 active satellites in orbit. Currently, there's somewhere between 10 to 12,000 active satellites. And by 2035, we think that there's going to be close to 53,000 satellites. And so we are entering an era where we are going to have more information than we know what to do with. And so the ability to keep those assets, safe, but also have scalable systems to manage the data and those satellites is really critical. The next layer for me is in-space logistics. Really, the way that you unlock the space economy is by being able to take Earth out of the equation. So when we can maneuver in space, when we can refuel in space, when we can do like robotic servicing in space, we're going to give utility to space that we've never really seen before. The next layer on top of that is power and communications architecture. So specifically in the lunar sphere and also the cislunar environment, we're still very much operating in this generator phase, right? Because we bring all the power on board that we need. We need to get to more of a grid phase. And so how we innovate power and communications is just going to enable operations, I think, more than we understand, right? It is this really critical layer. And then the last piece is just being able to unload the capacity and the opportunity and demand. And that comes down to spaceports and launch infrastructure. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but we're globally launching now once every 28 hours. And the year before, it was once every 34 hours. So even within a year, we've closed a delta of time. And that just shows that that's not slowing down, particularly as rockets become a lot more reliable and a lot more routine. We don't want to hinder ourselves by physically not having the ability to launch them into space. And so the physical bottlenecks are really becoming real constraints. And so spaceports and the surrounding infrastructure are definitely, they've always been part of the conversation, but they're a really critical part now so that we don't cut ourselves off at the knees in terms of actually accelerating to where we want to go.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. So for I guess, the founder that is kind of getting from that proven prototype phase and trying to cross that chasm into an actual, multiple government or commercial contracts, what's the best piece of advice you have for this?
Ooh. I would say that within space, technology risk is often the easiest part. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because it's an interesting concept, because you will often hear founders say that space isn't special. It's just how you engage the market and how it grows, and a lot of the coordination and alignment pieces. The hardest part in space really is the market and procurement risk. And it goes back to what I was saying before about technology alone not being impressive enough to make a market. We are an industry that are full of dreamers and doers, which I love, right? I love this industry because everyone you work with is so excited to be engaging the future and play their part in it. But that alone does not scale a company or win contracts. Just because your technology works, right? That's not enough. And you don't secure capital really anymore just because you have a great idea or you're enthusiastic about his prospect. And so we're a much more mature industry with a lot of battle scars. And so growth now is very much predicated, I would say, on like mature forecasting, or at least understanding where you're going to potentially scale and where you may have to pivot. I think founders really need to think about their go-to-market strategy as early as they think about their engineering, especially in this new environment where we're shifting beyond these, anchored government exquisite systems and relying more on hybrid commercial. And so I think for a lot of founders, if they can't specifically answer like who is writing the check and why now, I don't think you're really ready to start engaging. And so for many founders, I think, it's important right now to start understanding your customer's acquisition process and who your core customers may be. I think you need to start mapping your capabilities to a budget line. And then I think you need to start understanding what a path to scalability could look like. Even in these nascent segments, you'll always have the ability to pivot as needed, but at least it shows this judicious foresight of understanding that this is this is a stable market, right? And so even though the technology may be exquisite and impressive, it needs to fit and it needs to make sense for capabilities down the road.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Okay, so as we look out into the future, I don't know, over the next decade or so, what's kind of the one sci-fi concept that is in development currently, but will kind of be a mundane part of our daily economic reality in the future?
So I would say in space logistics. It's that whole in space servicing beltway I mentioned. The acronym is called ISAM. Um, it's interesting because right now the idea of servicing, refueling, and moving assets in orbit still feels futuristic. I love when I talk to people and they ask me what I do, and I say space, and they're like, "Space?" I'm like, "Yes, space." And then I tell them about how you're going to use space, and they look at me like I'm crazy, but not, right? So, what's interesting too is that really within a decade or probably earlier than that, this will be normal because there are so many companies that are already working in this domain that have done these really sophisticated demonstrations. They just need the capital to go from demo to scale. And so they've proven a lot of those technological hurdles. It's now, again, the coordination piece, the scale piece, the capital piece. But in my opinion, when this happens and when this layer is put in place, it's going to fundamentally not only change the way that we engage space because we're going to have access and utility in different ways, but it's also going to fundamentally change the economics of space because we're going to have this persistent infrastructure that we've never had before. And then that's going to open layers again for new capabilities and companies to join the landscape and start to engage and create new business models that we may not even see yet.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely see. I had the great privilege to moderate a session during satellite on orbit operations, and we had folks from Impulse Space and Rendezvous Robotics and Momentous Space, and they are all actively doing ISAM and RPOD and all kinds
Yeah.
of operations on orbit already, and have many more launches scheduled. So it'll be, I think it's right around the corner.
I mean, it is, yeah. I'm very excited about it. That's the one that I've been answering that kind of question for a couple years with that portfolio because it's an important one.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for making time to be here today. If someone wanted to learn more about the Commercial Space Federation or just connect with you, what should they do?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So to learn more about the Commercial Space Federation, our website is commercialspace.org, and you can reach out there. All of us are active, and then for me in particular, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and if you drop me a note, I can communicate through messages, and then I can send you my email.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for making time to be here. And I do want to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.
Great. Thank